Need your daily fix on mixed martial arts?
We're going to kind of recap Bellator 155.
From UFC 198.
Who's who?
Kind of a controversial decision.
And who's not?
I couldn't figure out why, and then it hit me.
Well, don't you fret, because Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your daily dose of MMA podcasts. Everything from the UFC, Bellator Fighting Championship, Extreme Cage Fighting, Invicta Fighting Championships, and so much more. Join us as we talk about some of the biggest names in mixed martial arts. We've got you covered here on Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC MMA Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Arnel de Leon, and hopefully you, your friends, and your family are all doing perfectly fine, and you're all healthy. So, let's get to the news brief for some mixed martial arts. UFC 249 pay-per-view headed to Florida on May 9th. This is coming in from MMAfighting.com, and it looks as though UFC 249 will take place in the Sunshine State. Multiple people with knowledge of the promotion's plans confirmed to MMA Fighting that the May 9 pay-per-view event is slated to take place in Florida. The people who requested anonymity because the promotion's plans aren't public also confirmed that fighters will fly into Jacksonville before traveling to the still undisclosed location. UFC 249 was originally scheduled to take place April 18 in Brooklyn, New York, before it was moved to Tachi Palace Casino Resort in Lemoore, California. The event was officially postponed earlier this month due to concerns with the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis issued an order earlier this month approving a list of essential businesses, which could include MMA. The order enables events for employees at a professional sport and media production with a national audience, including any athletes, entertainers, production team, executive team, media team, and any others necessary to facilitate, including services supporting such production. Only the location is closed to the general public. The Florida State Boxing Commission confirmed in a follow-up email to MMA Fighting that they are prepared to regulate a professional sports production as long as it adheres to their guidelines. The commission has already regulated one professional MMA event during the pandemic, employing social distancing and enhanced attendee rescreening for a show held in an empty arena. UFC 249 is currently headlined by a pair of title fights. Tony Ferguson takes on Justin Gaethje for the interim lightweight title, and bantamweight champion Henry Cejudo defends his title against former champion Dominic Cruz. So, it's reported here that's going to happen in Florida. We don't know where in Florida, but it's going to happen there. And this is very intriguing. The reason why is because there always is a comparison of the WWE and UFC/MMA. Even though both fan bases, like the people who watch WWE, aren't really the biggest fans as it pertains to UFC. Like, the logic behind pro wrestling is pretty much the exact opposite as it pertains to mixed martial arts, and their logic of what is considered marketable, what's considered good entertainment, what's considered a quality show, what's considered a better show. But strangely enough, the UFC and WWE are always compared off and on again, because the reason why I'm bringing up WWE is that because Dana White and Vince McMahon are part of that collective unit working in the economic task force alongside with Donald Trump. And ironically enough, the WWE is considered an essential business. So I find it very strange here that WWE, which is not even a sport, it's theater. Pro wrestling pretty much is theater. It's not a real legitimate sport though. People do get hurt doing pro wrestling, but it's not real. It's scripted. We have people doing backflips and somersaults and doing really poor leg locks and rear naked chokes to each other, and it's considered entertainment. It's considered sports entertainment, not legitimate sports, but sports entertainment. And depending on who you ask, the definition of sports entertainment varies between person to person. And so, how is it that the WWE is able to? Because they're still doing shows, by the way. They're still doing continually every single week shows. They've been doing live broadcasts. They've done pre-edited broadcast shows. They've been putting out content 3 times a week in a weekly basis ever since the coronavirus pandemic happened and Donald Trump implemented social distancing. So my question is, how is it that the WWE in the past month were able to do 3, 6, 9, 12, plus the 2 WrestleMania shows? Okay, so they've done 14 shows in the past month. the WWE, this fake sports show, did 14 shows in the past month. But yet, mixed martial arts, none of those events can go through Florida somehow. And now we're learning that the UFC a UFC event can happen in Florida, and it makes perfect sense here. And the reason why, there's a lot of shadiness behind as to why the WWE are considered essential businesses. When the WWE was considered an essential business, like the backstory behind this actually is because Vince McMahon's wife, Linda McMahon, holds some power within the White House as she's close to Donald Trump and members and representatives of the White House. And so there's a lot of money coming in towards advertising from the McMahon family coming into Florida's economy. That was one excuse as to why someone asked the governor of Florida, hey, how is it WWE is considered an essential business? And he responded that, well, WWE is an important part to the economy of Florida. I can guarantee you it's not. I can guarantee you this fake wrestling show. But besides, so their main show, the main show that they broadcast through Florida is NXT. And it's been proven, sorry I'm getting into like pro wrestling stuff here, but it's been proven here that NXT, the WWE loses more money than they actually make money funding NXT. It's pretty much a training ground facility for pro wrestlers when they get to the main roster of Monday Night Raw or Friday Night SmackDown. And so the show NXT is doing poorly in terms of economics, but the money that's being brought in somehow is a net positive for Florida. So what's going on here? It's kind of complicated. It doesn't really make that much sense to me. So there has to be like some shadiness or background aspect going on behind the scenes that we don't really get as to explain as to how the heck this can happen, but yet this over here, which is legitimate and real, can happen. I've been questioning for the past month on how is it that UFC can't get an event happening in Florida. They've been really adamant about having an event happen in California for some reason, which is very strange to me, considering that California has to be one of the most progressive, liberal, and one of the most like strict states out there out of all the states in America. It has the highest population of Americans than any other states in the United States. And so it makes logical sense for one to say, okay, chances are we can't have events happen in California because if you guys don't know, so in California, Los Angeles / the Silicon Valley area, it's a very popular area for a lot of Asian Americans, and there's supposed to be a lot of Asian performers coming here to go perform their music, but play songs here, to do some screenings. BTS, which is the biggest band in the entire world, BTS, which is very popular. It's a very popular band in Asia. They're supposed to perform in the Silicon Valley area. And so if the most popular band in the entire world aren't able to have an event coming up, with their event canceled in California, how is that how the heck is the UFC gonna an event happen in California? I don't know. There are many events that are having their things canceled, and they were so close to getting it done. They had a private representative to look over their event. They didn't need the California Athletic Commission to go and get their event going. But California, being the very strict state that it is, if you've ever lived in the Northern California area, or if you've ever lived around like downtown LA, like it's a very it's a state that takes itself very, very seriously, and it makes sense as to why public events aren't happening. There's a reason why public events, there are less people, even though Los Angeles and the Northern California area, San Francisco, even though those places, there's more people living in those areas than there are people living in Florida, in cities in Florida, you hear more news about people in Florida going to the beaches in Miami. And the reason is because people in California are more like, okay, I don't want to get people sick here. There's a lot of like restrictions happening in California. Florida, it's like there's people like talking to each other. They're battling out. There's a lot of questioning as to what's considered essential, what isn't essential. The dynamics between Florida and California are very different. And I always thought that UFC would try to push for a Florida event for the past month instead of the Fight Island, or instead of pushing for Las Vegas or pushing for California. I find it very strange. Florida is way less restrictive than Nevada and California. I thought it would make sense for Dana White to push events happening in Florida for the past month, but apparently it hasn't been happening. But now after a month and after several events being canceled, we might have an event coming up somewhere in Florida, possibly Miami, for UFC 249. We have one fight already canceled there, which was Amanda Nunes versus Felicia Spencer. And now, hopefully, with our fingers crossed here, we are going to have Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje and Henry Cejudo versus Dominic Cruz. I can't wait for that fight to happen, and hopefully, from this point on going forward, things aren't shifted around the cards, and we will have a UFC event happening May 9th. We can only hope so far. You're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back right after the short break.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
So while we are expecting a comeback from the UFC on May 9th, this is being reported in from MMAmania.com that Luke Rockhold name drops Anderson Silva following itch for UFC comeback. Former UFC middleweight champion Luke Rockhold did not announce his retirement from mixed martial arts because he didn't want to have to go back on his word if he ever felt the itch to compete. Sounds like that day is not far away. Fresh off a surgery to repair a bum shoulder, the 35-year-old Rockhold is keeping his eye on the coronavirus pandemic, as well as a pair of ex-middleweight title holders, including Anderson Silva and longtime 185-pound rival Chris Weidman. After getting healthier, I might be getting an itch. Luke Rockhold told MMA UK, transcribed by Damon Martin, "We'll see a lot of interesting fights. If Anderson Silva is still interested, and seemingly he is, maybe you never know. Chris Weidman got a fight coming up. If something, he comes out of that as well. You never know. There's options." Luke Rockhold has had his eye on Silva even before he crossed over to UFC. Thanks to a dominant run as Strikeforce middleweight champion, unfortunately his debut fight inside the octagon was against the TRT version of Vitor Belfort, which is akin to Dan Hibiki fighting against Shin Okuma. There was also his ill-fated trip up to the 205-pound division at UFC 239 last July, which ended at the hands of Jan Blachowicz by way of second-round knockout. Luke Rockhold is just 1-3 since beating Weidman for the middleweight strap back in late 2015. So, can we expect Luke Rockhold coming in 2021? Maybe yes, maybe so. So I have to look back to Luke Rockhold's performances against Michael Bisping and Chris Weidman, because those are his two most noteworthy performances. And also it kind of applies to Blachowicz here, and that Luke Rockhold came to his fight against Chris Weidman with the perfect strategy. So whatever your opinion is on Chris Weidman, and that I always viewed Chris Weidman as one of the more weaker champions in UFC history. Yes, he defeated against Anderson Silva, but he did not beat the best version of Anderson Silva out there. A win is still a win. Good for Weidman for getting that strap though. But after defeating against Anderson Silva, his career for the most part has been pretty much been going down. His run as champion wasn't all that impressive considering the fact that he had only one title defense, and that title defense came in a loss against Luke Rockhold. And considering the fact on how his career trajectory has been so far after defeating against Weidman, which has been going on also, you have to look at Luke Rockhold and Chris Weidman have very similar careers in that they peaked upon winning the world title. Then from that point on moving forward, they just kept losing and losing and losing. And we have to question, like, were these two fighters really as good as they are? And I say, like, yeah, they're really great fighters. I think we overrated Chris Weidman's ability as a great wrestler, because Luke Rockhold is a really good fighter. He's a great striker, and he's got a very underrated reverse wrestling game here. I still remember to this day when people are talking about who was going to win, Luke Rockhold versus Chris Weidman in the title bout they had. And I thought, without a doubt, Luke Rockhold was going to win this. I was sure 100% Luke Rockhold was going to defeat Chris Weidman. Not only that, I also predicted that Luke Rockhold was going to knock out Chris Weidman in the end of the second round. I was close to that, actually. So, Luke Rockhold, if the second round were to go on for another 10 more seconds, Luke Rockhold would have knocked out Chris Weidman by the end of the second round. It just didn't happen, though. So, he was pretty much pummeling, ground and pounding Weidman. At this point, the fight was pretty much over. By the end of the second round, everyone had a good idea. Oh, Luke Rockhold's going to win this fight. Because Luke Rockhold's wrestling game is incredibly strong. And for as good as people praise Chris Weidman in his wrestling ability, it seems like a lot of people are able to defend against his takedowns and his clinching. And then when Luke Rockhold knocked out Weidman, I was like, Chris Weidman here, his wrestling ability is good though, but I didn't think it would be good enough to go defeat against Luke Rockhold. And so when it comes to Luke Rockhold's career, it's just so Luke Rockhold, even though he's known as a great striker in Strikeforce, even though he has knockout power, when you look at his bouts against Michael Bisping and Blachowicz, you have to say, well, no, is this striking really up to par with the best of the top elite fighters within the UFC, or was he able to just outstrike Chris Weidman because Chris Weidman isn't all that strong of a striker in the first place, and his wrestling isn't up to par to an elite level that's like, oh my gosh, how are you going to stop him? How are you going to stop a Chris Weidman takedown here? Because when people look at Khabib Nurmagomedov, or even like Eddie Alvarez when he was champion, or when he was making his climb up the rankings to become champion, people are like, how are you going to stop Eddie Alvarez wrestling? How are you going to stop Khabib's wrestling? It's so good. It's hard to stop. How do you defeat a guy whose wrestling ability is so good that there's no way you can even like strike against him because he can go resort to wrestling? And then when Luke Rockhold fought against Weidman and he was able to stop him down the wrestling here, we're like, okay then. So Weidman here, who's supposed to be this really great wrestler, isn't as strong as a wrestler as he should be. And then you got Luke Rockhold, who's a really great striker, was able to knock out a guy who he was able to stop in the wrestling category, and his striking ability isn't really up to par. Weidman did knock out Anderson Silva, but then again, we did not see if you say, okay, what's the best version of Anderson Silva? We were in the tail end of a really good Silva. We really were. And so I wasn't all that impressed by that performance here. Now, Chris Weidman is still fighting. He hasn't been doing well for himself recently. He's on a losing streak, sadly. And strangely enough, though, Chris Weidman versus Luke Rockhold, that's a money match in my personal opinion. Those were two former champions. There's a story behind that. And even though both of those fighters are pretty much in the downturn of their careers, I wouldn't mind watching a Chris Weidman versus Luke Rockhold fight. It would be a very interesting, fun fight. And we will see like how far have these two improved in their games. Can Weidman finally take down Luke Rockhold? Is Luke Rockhold's striking ability really as bad as it has been the past couple of years? Now, I'm not saying that these fighters are very, very bad. I feel bad for saying that these fighters, that their striking ability in the wrestling game is not up to par then. But just recently, I thought these two would be doing way better. Hopefully their career paths do become a lot more better, and we can expect the best out of Luke Rockhold and Chris Weidman. They're both also really young. They're both only in their mid-30s, actually, while we have some fighters like Daniel Cormier who are in their 40s. These two fighters, Chris Weidman and Luke Rockhold, they should be getting better, actually. They should be fighting a lot more smarter. I know Luke Rockhold and Weidman, from the way how I watch them fight, they've been getting a little bit overconfident. For Chris Weidman, he's been getting a little bit too confident when he shoots in for a takedown. And for Luke Rockhold, he dives in too much. He tries to dive in too much instead of trying to fight outside the pocket and trying to poke in. Instead of fighting very smart against fighters who are very strong strikers in the inside and in clinching, like Michael Bisping and Blachowicz, he's trying to go for these 50-50 toe-to-toe exchanges here. And for as good as Luke Rockhold is in striking, actually, he's not fighting the smartest against fighters like those two. He should fight. He fights way too impatiently. That's how I describe Weidman and Luke Rockhold. That's why we've seen those two guys get knocked out multiple times after they won their belts. They're fighting. They should fight a lot more smarter. I know there are a lot of people who are against that. They're like, oh man, you're the champion. You should go out there and dominate people. But if you look at other fighters, from John Jones to Amanda Nunes, two very dominant champions, two very dominant fighters. You look how they're fighting recently, how they've both been fighting. those two fighters, Amanda Nunes and John Jones. Also, when you look at a fighter like Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier, none of those people in the past couple fights, I'd say the past 3 fights, are not really knockout artists. I really would say that. I think they're a lot more smarter, more dynamic, more technical, they're fighters who much prefer the slower pace, very cardio-based fight where they're trying to fight through all 5 rounds. They're prepping up for a 5-round fight. They're fighting a lot more smarter, and they're fighting a lot more safe. And even though it's not, Rockhold and Chris Weidman still fights when they were champions as if they're trying to climb up the ranks. That's how I describe those two fighters. I want those two to be a lot more better, and you know what? If Luke Rockhold is trying to challenge Chris Weidman or Anderson Silva, those are the 2 smart fights. I really think so. I think if there's anybody that Luke Rockhold has a high chance of defeating, it'd be against Anderson Silva and Chris Weidman, because stylistically, I think they match perfectly well with Luke Rockhold, and he could pull away with the victory here. Also, here's another thing. So even though Luke Rockhold has been away from the fight game for a while, he's actually a really popular dude. Only because people are making fun of him on YouTube and on social media a lot. But he's still a relatively really popular person. So it's not hard to promote a Luke Rockhold match or Weidman match or Anderson Silva match, considering the fact that they're all former champions. So coming up after the break here, we'll be discussing some more MMA news right here at the GSMC MMA podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
So we discussed UFC 249 along with Chris Weidman, Anderson Silva, and Luke Rockhold. And I remember in the Chris Weidman versus Luke Rockhold fights, all of my friends were betting on Chris Weidman into defeating Luke Rockhold. All of my friends were like, oh yeah, man, Chris Weidman's wrestling ability is going to overmatch whatever Luke Rockhold had in the fight. And in the fight, I betted for Luke Rockhold to win, and I bet Luke Rockhold to defeat Chris Weidman in the 2nd round. Instead, it became early in the 3rd round, with most of the damage coming in the end of the 2nd round. And so I'm talking about betting odds in UFC 249, because the May 9 UFC event, the betting odds are out. So we got Tony Ferguson coming in at -200 as the favorite versus Justin Gaethje, Henry Cejudo as the favorite with -220 versus Dominic Cruz, Francis Ngannou as the overwhelming favorite against Rozenstruik here at -310, which is very surprising to me considering the fact that Rozenstruik he's not a joke fighter. He can potentially knock out Ngannou himself, even though Ngannou is a tough fighter. Rozenstruik himself is a really tough fighter, and I can see this fight go either way. Calvin Kattar versus Jeremy Stephens here. Calvin Kattar is coming in as the favorite at -260. Second highest betting odds favorite here. I'm not surprised there. Greg Hardy will come in as the favorite against Yorgan De Castro. Greg Hardy at -185. So the interesting thing about Greg Hardy is the fact that although Greg Hardy has shown that he's got great punching power, he's got great timing, and he has a whole lot of potential to go dominate and defeat his opponents, though, the only thing stopping Greg Hardy would be his overall knowledge of the rules of mixed martial arts and in the UFC. That's the only thing that's holding back Greg Hardy. His fight IQ is the only thing stopping Greg Hardy from ascending the ranks in the heavyweight division. Beyond that, though, he has all the tools and the skills and the ability to defeat anybody in the heavyweight division that's not part of the top 5. And I think Greg Hardy has a chance here against Yorgan De Castro. I can understand and I can see why people will say, oh, Greg Hardy is going to defeat Yorgan De Castro also. So we got Fabricio Verdum as the overwhelming favorite versus Aleksei Oleinik at -265 here. Fabricio Verdum, even though I'm surprised, how is he the favorite despite the fact that he's been gone from the fight game for a while? Yes, Aleksei Oleinik's his more recent performances haven't been all that well for him though. But the fact that Verdum is coming off some ring rust though does. And it comes across as a sign as to why you shouldn't bet all that much though for Verdum to go win the fight. Yes, we got a fight like, for Conor McGregor versus Donald Cerrone then, by the logic that I just said, Donald Cerrone should have defeated Conor McGregor considering that Conor McGregor was rusty coming to his fight against Cerrone. But I was proven wrong there. And I might be proven wrong here when Verdum faces against Oleinik here. I personally predict that Oleinik is going to defeat Verdum. But that's my prediction here. But a lot of people believe that Verdum's going to come back here, and if he defeats Oleinik, he's definitely going to fight somebody within the ranks of Ngannou possibly, and go for a heavy title fight against Stipe Miocic if everything goes well for Verdum in his next 2 upcoming fights. Jacare Souza is coming in as the favorite at minus 150 versus Uriah Hall, and Vicente Luque is minus 230 favorite versus Nico Price. So these are the betting odds favorite here. So if you have an interest, if you're intrigued on, who's going to win this fight, or who are people going to pull for this fight here, you know what? For the most part, I kind of agree with a lot of these predictions here. Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje. I understand. Tony Ferguson. The reason why I say Justin Gaethje isn't going to win this fight against Tony Ferguson, because if you've been following Tony Ferguson through social media and all different news platforms out there, Ferguson's always doing interviews and talking about how much he's so dedicated to this fight. Like from my inclination as to when Dana White was saying, hey, how did Tony Ferguson react when Khabib was pulled out of a fight against him for the 5th time? Dana White said, Ferguson, man, he's just still pushing forward. Like, it didn't really matter that much to Ferguson. And even if Ferguson is trash-talking Khabib still, I think he's still going to push the fight after the Gaethje fight. Even though he's still pushing for that fight, I just don't see Ferguson losing to Justin Gaethje. I think Ferguson's camp is so committed. I haven't seen Ferguson train and be so focused for one fight more than any other fight that I've ever seen Ferguson in. Also, here's the thing. Justin Gaethje has nothing to lose in this fight. He really does. He really does. So when I say who's taking this fight more seriously, Tony Ferguson or Justin Gaethje? Now, Justin Gaethje, the dude is a warrior. The dude is not good. He is one of the tanks. He is one of the tanks of the lightweight division. And I just don't reasonably see Tony Ferguson knocking out Justin Gaethje. I can see Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje ending up as a 5-round classic within the same realm of Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jacek. I can really see that. I can see these two people going at it for all 5 rounds. I could see a kind of a replay of Anthony Pettis versus Tony Ferguson, how those two were going all out though, but Ferguson was just hitting Pettis a little bit just more. He's fighting a little more fighter. His strikes were a little more cleaner. So for Gaethje versus Ferguson there, I understand why Ferguson will be the favorite. Gaethje, if Gaethje loses fights, he's not going to lose much. Gaethje only has pretty much 2 weeks of training to prep up against fighting Tony Ferguson, who is one of the best fighters in the entire lightweight division, arguably the second best fighter in the entire lightweight division here. So if Justin Gaethje loses, well, you can't really fault him for him losing, because he had a very short prep time for prepping up to fight against this elite top tier fighter. And if Gaethje wins this fight, then you know what? All credit goes to him. He was able to defeat Ferguson, and it bypasses his way through with anyone else around in the top 5 rankings to go fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov. He passes Conor McGregor, he passes Tony Ferguson, and he gets a quick instant bye against Khabib. So Gaethje has nothing to lose, but because Gaethje has nothing to lose, then then I can see Ferguson being more committed, because Ferguson has more to lose off this fight. If Gaethje loses, his rankings is still the same actually. Like he might fight Khabib right after Ferguson does. Gaethje is only 1 or 2 fights away from fighting Khabib. He really is. He's that close. And if Gaethje were to lose his fight against Ferguson, and Ferguson were to fight against Khabib, hopefully that fight happens. But if Ferguson were to fight against Khabib, and then if either of those 2 fighters lost, Gaethje would be right next. So pretty much Gaethje has a title fight bye coming up, whether or not he wins or loses this fight. So Gaethje here, man, like he's got nothing to lose, and I can see him not taking his training camp as seriously as Ferguson is. Now Henry Cejudo versus Dominic Cruz. So we're not going to see the Jose Aldo fight, which is pretty sad. It's interesting to see Dominic Cruz. This wouldn't be the first time that Dominic Cruz would be coming back from a long layoff, and he's immediately placed in a title fight. Man, it's sadly enough though, unlike the other fighters that I mentioned when it comes to ring rust, Dominic Cruz will have it worse than anyone else. So when he did his first comeback and he got the title fight in the UFC, he was a little bit younger. Now he's a little bit older. And I think he's very comfortable right now as just a commentator and just as a fight analyst. And even though he's a very intelligent fighter, he's going to come to this fight against Henry Cejudo, fight very smart, but I think physically he is not prepped up to go fight against Henry Cejudo. He's gone through, no matter how smart you are or no matter how smart of a fighter you are, no matter how your IQ is for any sports, you can be incredibly intelligent when it comes to basketball or baseball. You can be able to spot pitches and be able to recognize defenses in basketball. But if you can't physically keep up, then no matter how smart you are, it's not going to help you. It just really isn't, especially when you're actually in the game. That's why we don't have coaches. That's why a baseball coach, they can spot a pitch more better and more easier than batters do. But pitching coaches, if they actually get a bat, they ain't going to do so well for themselves. They'll do, even though they know where the pitch is coming through, they physically can't react fast enough, or they can't react fast enough or hit hard enough to be able to go get a home run, unlike other batters. And so in this scenario, we got a really smart fighter who's going to fight smart against Henry Cejudo and Dominick Cruz. But physically, Dominick Cruz, I don't think he has a chance against Henry Cejudo. I really don't. So even though Cruz might have the reach advantage against Cejudo, which is the one thing that Cruz is going to be pushing for, Dominick Cruz is going to fight Henry Cejudo the same way that he fought against Cody Garbrandt. In the fact that he's going to keep poking, he's going to fight outside the pocket, he's going to get in, get out, he's going to fight very quick, very snappy. He's going to try to avoid as much damage as he can and try to avoid the 50-50 scenarios. That didn't help out with him when he fought against Cody Garbrandt here, but I understood the strategy. In terms of strategy, Dominick Cruz fought very smart and fought the right way against Cody Garbrandt. It is Cody Garbrandt, I think, in a physical sense, which is more superior and better than him in that fight. So, in this scenario, I say Henry Cejudo is the favorite to defeat against Dominick Cruz. I predict here a 5-round fight. I think Dominick Cruz is going to lose this fight after via unanimous decision, and Henry Cejudo is going to maintain his belt and continue his reign as bantamweight champion. And so, after the short break here, we'll be coming back here with some more MMA news here at the GSMC MMA Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So we were discussing Henry Cejudo versus Dominick Cruz as Dominick Cruz's big return fight, and Dominick Cruz is getting a title fight despite the fact that he hasn't competed for the UFC in about 3 years. And we got a detractor here in Peter Yan. So Peter Yan was initially supposed to fight against Dominick Cruz in Dominick Cruz's big return fight, but instead he isn't going to do that. Instead, Dominick Cruz is going to bypass him and is getting an immediate title shot. This is coming in from MMAfighting.com that Peter Yan is upset by Dominick Cruz's title shot. Says it's a big hit for the UFC's reputation. Peter Yan does not understand why the UFC has allowed former champion Dominick Cruz to step in for Jose Aldo and get the next shot against the bantamweight champion in Henry Cejudo. With 6 wins in as many outings under the promotional banner, many believe that No Mercy should be in the next in line for a crack at the bantamweight crown, although a win over former title contender Marlon Moraes will likely force the Russian into the championship stakes. Yan doesn't understand why the promotion has opted for Cruz, who hasn't competed since his title loss to Cody Garbrandt in 2016. To be honest, moments like this in UFC kind of upsets me, Yan told MMA Fighting's Eurobash podcast. He didn't fight for 3 years and now he's getting a title shot. It kind of upsets me. It's a big hit for the UFC's reputation, in my opinion. Yan pondered why he was not given the nod by the UFC when it became apparent that Aldo would not be able to leave Brazil to compete in the event. He goes on to say that maybe it's because I'm not in America that I wasn't granted this title shot, or maybe it's because I'm not American that they didn't give me this opportunity. Maybe it's because they're afraid of me and they don't want to give the chance to win another title to a Russian fighter. Maybe they don't want 2 Russian champions, he said. I don't think that's UFC's main goal, but to me it's kind of unclear as to why they give to Cruz. I don't think, in my opinion, he's going to bring a lot of pay-per-view buys. I don't know why. It's kind of a difficult question for me. I think there are more active and deserving fighters that could fight for the belt, and I don't understand why they'd give it to a guy that's been so inactive for so long, he added. Despite the situation, Jan maintains that he has not lost respect for Henry Cejudo, but underlined his confusion as to why the UFC has agreed with the matchups that the champion has suggested. I can't say I lost respect for Cejudo. I know that he's playing the game, he's doing his part, but it's weird that the UFC also agrees with him. That's kind of weird. Okay, so Peter Yan here. Have you not been following mixed martial arts or combat sports for the past 30 years? The UFC has always been pushing for money fights, even if it doesn't logically make any sense within the ranking system. That's why the rankings, they kind of matter, but they also don't matter at the same time. There's reasons why all of a sudden a fighter like George St. Pierre all of a sudden gets his title fights. Or a fighter like BJ Penn. How the heck is this guy constantly competing in UFC cards even though he's in a major losing streak? How is it that Brock Lesnar and Mark Hunt are competing in the main card for a UFC event despite the fact that both those fighters haven't had a good track record for the past couple of years? Also for Brock Lesnar, he for the most part has been working as a pro wrestler for the WWE, but yet he's performing in the main card for the UFC. Also, we've heard speculation that, like, Brock Lesnar could have fought against John Jones in a weird catchweight bout. We've heard rumors that Brock Lesnar could have had a main event title run happening for the UFC. So, even also for champion versus champion fights, it doesn't all make the... How many champions versus champion fights has happened in the UFC? Now, my idea has been, okay, so if one fighter is a champion of one division... that doesn't mean they're even ranked in the second division they're trying to go for. So Conor McGregor. When he was featherweight champion, he was nowhere near any of the rankings for the lightweight belt. He was not there, but they still booked Conor McGregor versus Eddie Alvarez for the lightweight bout. Even though Conor McGregor was not even in the lightweight division. I think Conor McGregor fought once in the lightweight division, but he was like, "Oh, wait, you're a former champion. You're a current champion now, so that gives you enough credibility or prestige to place you for a title fight in a division that you don't even really participate in." It's very strange. It's like when Luke Rockhold moved his way up to the 205-pound division. To be honest with you, even Luke Rockhold hasn't fought in the 205-pound division before. When he made the jump from middleweight to 205, the fact that he was a former champion, gave him enough credibility to go bypass a whole lot of people and fight against a top fighter like John Blachowicz. That's just how the UFC has been for a while. It's always been pushing towards money fights, dating back to UFC 1. All right, then UFC 1. Here's the funny part. Rankings weren't really a thing till late 90s, and it wasn't even really treated with respect until the 2000s, really. And it's because, here's the truth though, you need to be popular. That's the sad reality about combat sports, and in general, like all sports, and that if you are popular enough with the media and the fans, you will get some leeway, and you'll be able to get away with some things that other athletes won't be able to do. Like explain Sage Northcutt and Paige Van Zandt. Their entire presence in mixed martial arts is based around the idea that they're the most marketable people ever for any combat sports league if they're to become champions. So let's say there's a boardroom. There's a boardroom comprised of 12 people, all in suits, all with a background in business. They graduated from some top college like UCLA in business administration or psychology or social sciences, whatever. They have this advanced degree from this top tier college. They don't follow mixed martial arts. All they know is that there's a lot of money coming into mixed martial arts here, and they want to promote and market a star. So you have two options. Do you want Eddie Alvarez as the face of the UFC? Or do you want Sage Northcutt or Paige Van Zandt to be the face of the UFC? If you appeal to anyone within the 18 to 34 demographic, then you are marketable. Conor McGregor, there's a reason why he's marketable over someone like Eddie Alvarez. There's a reason why, even though Jon Jones, even though a lot of the more older fight fans don't respect and like Jon Jones, there are people who are 18 to 34 who really love him. They follow him on his Instagram. They follow him through social media. They look him up. Like Jon Jones and Conor McGregor, they have a very young audience. Now compare that to someone like Eddie Alvarez or Jose Aldo or Marlon Moraes. Yes, those people, they're relatively young still, actually. They're all relatively young. But they don't particularly appeal to the audience that Jon Jones, that Arnel Rousey, that Conor McGregor, that Brock Lesnar, the audience that they appeal to. I know, it's messed up. Where's the ethics? Where are the ethics in this sports? And that, it's a sad reality, actually. It really is. That the UFC has always been pushing for this. I found it so ironic that when it was booked for Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz 3 under Golden Boy Productions, under Oscar De La Hoya's promotion, I thought to myself, wow, this is really bad. Why the heck are these two people still fighting at their age? They have name recognition towards the much larger audience, and I think the younger audience respects them, but these two have no business being in the octagon fighting each other, especially Chuck Liddell. And then when they fought, there was a lot of people talking about the events negatively, sadly. Those are still too many names. And so Dana White goes on to talk about how awful it is that they booked Chuck Liddell to a fight, even though he has no business competing in the fight game. But you look at the UFC's roster at the time of that event happening, they still had BJ Penn. They were still booking BJ Penn to compete in fights. No matter how many times that BJ Penn goes through an incident outside of the octagon, similar to Jon Jones, no matter how bad of a performance BJ Penn does, it's not, BJ Penn still has a job for some strange reason. Now, BJ Penn doesn't work for the UFC anymore, but at the time of that event, when it was Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz 3, one could say, like in a boardroom of people, they're like, you know what? We can, even though it makes no logical sense, really, they still have enough clout to bring in an audience. That's how I perceive Dominic Cruz right now. I don't think Dominic Cruz deserves to fight against Henry Cejudo. I think he has to work his way up. I understand that because he has some clout and has some prestige as a former champion, that gives him some leeway. But I truly believe that Peter Yan should be competing against Henry Cejudo for the bantamweight belt. But you know what? According to some people, Dominic Cruz is still a moneymaker, and I definitely disagree with that. I don't think he is a moneymaker or he's going to provide any pay-per-view buys, but that's just the reality of things. And sadly, I would like to live in a perfect world where rankings actually mattered. You're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back right after the short break.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And we are back. So the next upcoming UFC event that we don't know what the official name for it is. Is it UFC 249? Is it UFC on Fight Night? UFC on ESPN? What is happening with the next UFC event? You know what? Even though we're nearing that date in just about 2 weeks, we are still unsure of what we can expect. What we do know so far is that it will definitely take place on May 9th. But really enough, we're nearing the 10-year anniversary of one of my personal favorite fights of all time, and that is on May 8th of 2010 was UFC 113. And when you look back at this card here, it's like, wow, time really does fly by here for some fighters. So this card had Matt Mitrione versus Kimbo Slice as the second fight in the main card, which is very, very bizarre. It's always been bizarre knowing that Kimbo Slice fought in the UFC, just because there was a period of time during the 2010s, 2009 area that Kimbo Slice was incredibly popular. I was still in school, and everybody knew who Kimbo Slice was. There was more people who knew Kimbo Slice than they did Chuck Liddell, than they did Randy Couture. There were even a lot more people that knew in my circle who knew who Kimbo Slice was over a person like Brock Lesnar. Kimbo Slice even appealed to people who don't even watch sports. So me, even though I did play some sports though, I didn't really hang out with the jocks all that much. But the members who are not, but people who are not jocks and who don't really follow sports are like, hey man, I love Kimbo Slice. I even took a theater class back at high school, that there people were like, oh man, Kimbo Slice, did you see that fight on the video on YouTube? Wow, it was amazing. Kimbo Slice, yeah. People were talking about Kimbo Slice in theater rooms in the late 2000s, which is so bizarre for me. Really enough though, one of my personal favorite fighters, Matt Mitrione, defeated Kimbo Slice. And Matt Mitrione in that Ultimate Fighting season that had Brendan Schaub in it. It had Brendan Schaub and like some other fighters like this. I think Michael Sweetney. It was Sweetney and Schaub were the two favorites to go and win the entire event, but they lost out to Roy Nelson, which was very because no two fighters. If you remember this, I think that was the season that was Rashad Evans versus Quinton Jackson. And so it was Quinton Jackson versus Rashad Evans. Now their fight was really boring. It was really bland. Their feud, but the reoccurring themes of that UFC Ultimate Fighting season was, hey, Kimbo Slice is here. Hey, former Strikeforce champion and Roy Nelson is here. Hey, Brendan Schaub and Michael Sweetney are studs. There was nobody else in that competition who was supposed to stand out beyond those four people. And so, but the person that I personally grew attached to in the entire season was Matt Mitrione, because, like, to me, the dude he had a weird physique in the sense that he had skinny fat, plus he had these very long arms, and he was pretty much a walking tank. And so to see Matt Mitrione, he TKO'd Kimbo Slice here, and I think after this fight, Kimbo Slice fought against Houston Alexander in what was supposed to be a very exciting fight. When you think, oh man, if you guys remember, Houston Alexander was a knockout artist. He was what Jeremy Stephens was early on in Jeremy Stephens' career, which was like, oh man, if you watch a Houston Alexander fight, man, dude, you are going to see a dude who's not going to fight all that technical, not the most prettiest fighter out there, but he's going to go in and he's going to knock out whoever he's competing with. I remember the UFC top 100 knockouts in UFC history, and a large majority of that, and a lot of I think Houston Alexander made up most of that top 100 list because he was oh, look at this guy, knockout artist, and he's fighting against Kimbo Slice, a kind of knockout artist from the streets. And then that fight was boring, didn't really mean much here. So if you want to see probably the biggest UFC fights ever in Kimbo Slice's career, you would have to watch Matt Mitrione versus Kimbo Slice. It's a very strong insight as to why there's a lot of these tough people I know in my personal life, man. They would so kick a lot of people's butts in the UFC. Nah, I got members of my family who are part of the military, and I got military friends here, and they'll all say for Matt, no matter how much training they do in the army and in the military, they're not in the same league as these professional MMA fighters. And Kimbo Slice basically kind of proves that as being a street fighter, going in and fighting against Matt Mitrione. Another fun fight here was Jeremy Stephens versus Sam Stouts. That was when Jeremy Stephens was really ascending the ranks as being like the hardest hitting guy in the lightweight division, man. So here's Jeremy Stephens. In the past 10 years, has fought the exact same way. It felt like everyone else has grown on and developed and being a more of a dynamic striker or developing a good all-around game, learning how to clinch, learning how to do takedown defense, learning how to wrestle. It's starting to become like people who are physically more dominant than the other fighter usually don't win out. They usually don't win out anymore. Look at Francis Ngannou. Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier, without a doubt, Stipe Miocic has defeated Francis Ngannou. But if we say, oh, who's going to win, Daniel Cormier or Brock Lesnar? Or Daniel Cormier versus Francis Ngannou. We all know Francis Ngannou and Brock Lesnar are physical specimens. They look like Greek gods, okay? If you were to make a blind bet, be like, who's going to win? This fat, out of shape, 6-foot black dude, or this gigantic dude jacked to the grill? This guy who looks like he's from another timeline. He's buff, he lifted Shaquille O'Neal, over his head very easily. Would you rather go for the fat dude, or would you rather go for the chiseled out, shaped like a Greek god guy? Who are you gonna choose? People mostly would pick Francis Ngannou, and a lot of people predicted that it was gonna be Francis Ngannou knocking out Daniel Cormier. But it didn't happen, did it? And it's so astounding that, like, Cormier, and even Henry Cejudo to a bit, actually, where, like, they look so ordinary. They don't look like fighters. That's like I say. They don't look like professional fighters. Henry Cejudo looks like that very dorky dude you meet, like, at a comic book store. That's how I gauge Henry Cejudo. Because if you've been following Henry Cejudo a lot in social media and stuff, he's kind of an awkward guy. He's kind of a quirky, awkward dude. And then, and for Daniel Cormier, the dude, like, he loves eating. Like, he talks about it all the time of how much he likes eating. And even a guy like Tyson Fury, I saw a random video where Tyson Fury, after he defeated Vladimir Klitschko. So Klitschko looks like a boxer. If you look at Klitschko, Klitschko takes off his shirt, you'd be like, dang, this guy's a whole stud. And you look at Tyson Fury, you could say, this guy looks like a homeless dude for the most part. He took off his shirt, he has this horrible physique. He's the exact opposite thing that somebody like Greg O'Gallagher, like, he's like this like bodybuilding guy on YouTube, would look at. It's just, these fighters who truly are physically are the top of the world, top of the line, top specimens in physical sports. These athletes they just don't look like athletes. They just really don't, and it's so bizarre. And then we have and I think it's very evident how fighting has really changed in this one fight over here, which was Josh Koscheck versus Paul Daley, which was the co-main event of this UFC 113 event. So Josh Koscheck versus Paul Daley. So Paul Daley, I always believed Paul Daley had all the tools to be the complete fighter. Paul Daley is what I thought Tyron Woodley would be. And in fact, okay, so you got Paul Daley here, who's athletically gifted, really strong. He's got heavy hands. He's not the best technical dynamic striker out there. He doesn't throw at all any little to no leg kicks. If you can read his boxing ability, it's not that hard to outbox Paul Daley, but Daley has the tools. And then when he fought against Josh Koscheck, this guy who was like one of the first heels, one of the first villains, like before Chael Sonnen, before Ben Askren, and right after Tito Ortiz, Josh Koscheck was a dude who purposely threw in the character, this like WWE style kind of character. I think Koscheck was being a little bit of himself, because you can obviously tell when Ben Askren and Chael Sonnen are full on character mode when they're playing a character. You can tell by their voice, because their voice kind of changes depending on the situation. They'll break in and out of character, but Josh Koscheck, man, like, he's just straight up a jerk for the most part, and he proved it here when he got Paul Daley out of the UFC through some mind games here. And up to this day, Paul Daley is still really salty about that, and got no one to blame but Paul Daley in that situation for sucker punching Josh Koscheck in between rounds there. It looked really bad for Daley here, and Josh Koscheck, through this fight against Paul Daley, was able to put himself in a position to go fight George St. Pierre. Now, George St. Pierre, you can't really challenge him in the mind games. It's been proved. Michael Bisping tried to outwit George St. Pierre in the mind games, and St. Pierre ain't having it, because St. Pierre's whole demeanor is so kind of outworldly, where it's hard to play mind games against a guy who himself is kind of a quirky dude. So, Josh Koscheck ended up fighting against GSP after the Paul Daley fight, and now we're 10 years after he won this number one contendership fight, and it's very strange how time has flown by so fast. And so coming up right after the short break here, we'll be discussing the near 10-year anniversary of Lito Machida versus Mauricio Shogun Rua 2 for the light heavyweight title. Coming back after the short break.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
And we are back. So, UFC 113 took place May 8th, 2010 in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. GSP's hometown there. And then we're nearing the 10-year anniversary of this event. So, what was going on in the UFC during that time? Well, the light heavyweight... So here's the strange part. So, the main event here was a light heavyweight bout between Lyoto Machida versus Mauricio Shogun Rua for the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship. So Shogun defeated Lyoto Machida 10 years ago, and then right after that, he fought and defended his belt against a young Jon Jones. So Jon Jones won his UFC Light Heavyweight belt for the first time, dating back to March 19, 2011. So, it's been 9 years. It's been 9 years since Jon Jones has won the light heavyweight belt for the first time. Until now, he's still currently the UFC light heavyweight champion. So one could argue, because Demetrius Johnson, yeah, he defended the belt a lot though, but I don't think he kept the belt as cumulatively as long as Jon Jones has kept the belt. So that speaks about how much, wow, Jon Jones, he won the belt in 2011, and now it's 2020, and he still has the belt. Yes, there's a major asterisk to that. There's a major asterisk in the fact, he kind of lost the belt in some occasions because he was stripped of it, though. But for the most part, he's been highly considered as the number one fighter in the entire light heavyweight division for the better part of 9 years, and no one has ever dethroned him. The only one dethroning Jon Jones is Jon Jones himself. And here's the weird part of it. I still believe we haven't seen the best version of Jon Jones yet. He's kind of holding himself back with his outside the octagon issues and personal issues. But still, Jon Jones, he's still really young actually. He can still continually compete for the UFC for maybe about 7-8 more years. So you can see Jon Jones maintain the belt for almost nearly another decade, which will be unprecedented, which would make Jon Jones maybe the greatest UFC champion of all time, and maybe the GOAT of the UFC and of all of mixed martial arts. Sadly, Jon Jones, outside issues, is the only hindrance to his career. But 9 years ago, Jon Jones won the belt, won his light heavyweight belt for the first time, and he still is the light heavyweight champion. Yes, he lost; it's been stripped, but he still maintains the belt after all this time. But let's talk about this fight between Shogun Rua versus Lyoto Machida here. So this was the rematch to which Lyoto Machida won, and I think Machida defended his belt. He defended his belt against Shogun, and was able to win the fight via split decision. And when I look back to the first Shogun versus Machida fights, so it's the same argument of okay, so who won the fight? Who really won a fight? If there are two fighters out there, is it a fighter that looks badly beaten up versus the fighter who actually objectively statistically did better in the fight? So I always bring up Cody Garbrandt versus Dominic Cruz here. If I were to get a sheet of paper and I'm write down a bunch of statistics, and I'm like, okay then, based on these numbers here, who won, Dominic Cruz or Cody Garbrandt? And Dominic Cruz laid on, I think he laid on almost 30 cumulative more strikes than Cody Garbrandt did. And so by the numbers, Dominic Cruz looks like that he steamrolled over Cody Garbrandt. But if you remember the fight, Cody Garbrandt pretty much through every single round was decisively defeating Dominic Cruz. Dominic Cruz walked out of that fight looking battered, looking bad for himself, looking damaged, while Cody Garbrandt looks perfectly fine and normal. And so that was Shogun's reasoning as to why he defeated against Lyoto Machida. Yeah, statistically, Lyoto Machida did better than Mauricio Shogun Rua. But who came out of it looking bad? Who came out looking worse? Who came out even more impressive? So Shogun Rua came out of that fight more impressive than Lyoto Machida did, but Lyoto Machida through Shogun just had his strikes were a lot more vicious, were a lot more hard hitting. If you're to say, okay, who here did the most harder strikes, the most harder kicks, the most harder elbows, the most harder punches? Mauricio Shogun Rua, without a doubt. But Lyoto Machida defeated Rua through total accumulation. And this always happens in the UFC. Joanna Jacek versus Weili Zhang is similar to Cody Garbrandt and Dominic Cruz. Dominic Cruz, because Joanna Jacek statistically did better than Weili Zhang in the fights. But if you look at Joanna's face, one could argue that Joanna Jacek would have not lost that fight against Weili Zhang. One could say if Joanna Jacek's face looked a lot more better and was less swollen up, you'd be like, oh man, dude, Joanna Jacek obviously and logically won that fight. but it didn't work out that way. And so Dana White, in the post-fight press conference was immediately like, okay, this will definitely happen. Mauricio Shogun Rua versus Lyoto Machida 2 is gonna happen because it was obvious that this fight is under like some scrutiny. There's a chance that either fighter could have won that. So you're not immediate title rematch coming up. I find that very strange though, because for the Dominic Reyes versus the John Jones fight, even though that fight was really split, a lot of people thought Dominic Reyes should have defeated against John Jones. After the fight happened, Dana White's like, you know what, it happens. Will there be a rematch? I'm not sure. I'll talk over some people, but I'm not sure if there's going to be a rematch. But you know what? You don't leave it to the judges. But for Shogun versus Machida, Dana White's like, yeah man, immediate rematch no matter what. I think Rua had a huge chance of defeating against Lyoto Machida here. So I rewatched Shogun versus Lyoto, and dang, these fighters, they're so fast. These guys are quick. So Mauricio Shogun is like a freight train, constantly pushing. There was not a single second to which Mauricio was ever walking backwards. It was ever counterfighting. This reminded me a lot of Colby Covington's tenacity when he fought against Rafael dos Anjos, and that he was always pushing forward, gave little to no breathing room for Lyoto Machida. Even for peak Lyoto Machida is one of a counterfighter more than anything else. Lyoto Machida very prefers a slow fight, a slow drag out fight to which he can go time out his counter punches and slowly grind out his opponents. That's Lyoto Machida's style. Yes, he has striking power and wrestling ability, but Lyoto Machida much prefers a slower paced fighting style versus Rua. So Rua fought Lyoto's style in the first fight, and in the rematch, Mauricio Shogun Rua was like, you know what? I am not going to give Lyoto any breathing room. I'm going to press the action all the time. If this fight were to go to the judges, I want the judges to score me winning these rounds because I'm the one who's pushing the action. Because the judges have the tendency of giving points or giving a round to the fighter who's pressing forward instead of backwards. So Mauricio Shogun Rua was like, you know what? I'm gonna go and press forward. Whatever happens, happens. I have enough confidence in my ability to get up and to counter strike whatever Lyoto Machida will bring out, or to handle myself if Lyoto were to take me down. And I remember, I think it's like UFC 2010, this UFC 2010 game, that it was pretty much impossible to wrestle against Shogun because he has the omoplata submission move. So what the omoplata is that from the ground position, he can go bring his like right or left leg over and then go for an armbar. And Mauricio Shogun Rua he didn't go exactly for omoplatas here, but pretty much Shogun was doing amazing for himself whenever Lyoto took him down. When I was watching that, there wasn't an instance where I was like, oh man, Lyoto took Shogun down. How will Shogun handle himself in this situation? And when I saw how Shogun was handling himself, dude, he was composed, he was fine. He wasn't like, Lyoto Machida exerted more effort into trying to put down Shogun for a takedown than Shogun did trying to get out. Which speaks about how good Shogun's jiu-jitsu game was. Now this led to Shogun pressing up on the action more on Lyoto. So Lyoto took down Shogun twice, but Shogun was able to get out of it within less than 30 seconds. Very quick. Lyoto was spent by the 2-minute mark of the first round. Shogun kept pressing the action, gave Lyoto no room to breathe, which led to Shogun knocking Lyoto out and becoming the light heavyweight champion. Shogun Rua will go down as one of my favorites of all time, and that fight was one of my favorites of all time, no doubt about it. It was the best version of Shogun we could get. It is by the time he fought against John Jones, no matter how good Shogun was, John Jones had infinite potential. And even till now, you could say John Jones arguably might be the most complete fighter of all of the UFC. So if you haven't seen it yet, go check up UFC 113, check up Shogun versus Lyoto, and you're gonna have a blast, and you'll be astounded how fast these fighters are back then. So that brings us to the end of today's show. Thank you for listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps up. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.GSMC.com. GSMCpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.